Hey everybody, thanks for checking out the CB vlog this week. If you like the show, go ahead, hit subscribe. If you love the show, head on over to patreon.com/commandersbrew and consider a bit of a donation. Okay,
what are we talking about for our discussion this week? The question I want to pose to you, Andy, is when do you want to cast your instance?
When do I want to cast my instance? At
yes.
the opponent to my right, like there and step.
That's true if it's something like a draw spell. But what if it's something like a counter spell or like a spot removal spell? Like, let's say a terminate.
Right, so I want to do it when at the last possible moment, right?
Last possible moment, sure. I guess I asked the question just to illustrate that there are different times that different instants and sorceries are good.
Right.
Right? Like a draw spell is good anytime. Like, it doesn't matter when you cast that. The effect is kind of what it is. Like, and of course, I'm not going to talk about weird corner cases, like if someone's about to resolve a consecrated sphinx and things like that. Like, in general. And then, like, and then a kill spell, you probably only want to use that when the time is right. Like, you don't just want to fire it off when you have the mana available, right? You want to make sure it's threatening you specifically. It's a really big threat. And then I think the most narrow types of instance are counter spells, because they really only work at the time of the casting of the spell. And you have to decide, like, is this a spell I want to counter? They're really telegraphable. But the reason I ask is because, are we thinking about, as deck brewers, I'm using the collective we, not necessarily you and me, Andy, but are we thinking about what we're doing with our mana when we're not spending them on those instants that are not draw spells? Like, we'll always fire off a draw spell, but what if we end up holding up a terminate and we don't use it? Can we use that 2 mana elsewhere?
Right, so the idea is that, like, if we're in a deck that wants to hold up mana, for our opponent's turns, which is generally good. You want to be doing things, like we said, last possible moment is kind of the rule of thumb. If we're not using, let's say that like we hold up kill spell mana for, like, I don't know, murder, terminate, whatever, is that then just going to waste?
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. But so I would say that what is happening there, though, is that you are trading off, let's say that turn, you're trading off casting another small spell for 2 or 3 mana or whatever it is, with the flexibility to be able to handle any of the threats that may come up, between that turn and your next turn.
Yeah, I think that's good strategy, right?
You're trading that flexibility. Yeah, which I think is very important in a multiplayer game as well. It's nice to have. Absolutely. Lots of times have I tapped out and been like, I'm fine. I'm not going to die here this turn, and then you definitely just get killed. It's like, if I just had a kill spell, it would have been okay. Yeah,
right, totally. And our opponents know this, and they're going to, like, if we have a ton of mana open, they're less likely to do things. It's good for us to leave mana open, but it's bad for us to not spend mana when we could. So I want to propose the notion that we should be looking at our decks at the instants specifically that are conditional. The counter spells, the spot removal spells that we want to wait for. I don't think draw spells count as this, because we'll just use those whenever we can, right? Like if we have the mana,
you'll just use a draw spell on the end, on your opponent to your right's end step,
no matter what.
That's the whole idea. So ideally, that's why blue decks do this so well, is that they'll hold up mana for a counter spell, but also then it's like, you didn't cast anything I want to counter. Bam, I'll just fire off this draw spell. Therefore, I still did use that mana.
Right. And we want all of our decks to mimic that, right?
Ooh, so that's tough, right? Green, red. I mean, this is going to be tougher for these other decks to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Well, it could be, unless we start thinking about things like mana sinks, right? So red and green don't necessarily have instants that are amazing at end of turn.
Right.
Like they have to have some sort of permanent effect. And straight draw is the easiest, but like maybe putting counters on a creature at instant speed, that's something we could do, but that's conditional whether or not we have a creature we want to put the counters on. Destroying is, again, this specific things, but mana sinks are a great way to kind of take advantage of that. Cantrippy spells, cycling cards, these are all things that I think as brewers we just need to consider. We need to make sure. Because I guess what got me thinking about this, if you have a deck full of spot removal spells, but no other instants or mana sinks, you're handicapping yourself, because you'll never be able to you'll be wasting 2 or 3 mana per turn.
That's true. Yeah, something on board to be able to do that type of mana sink. That's important.
Yeah, huge. And I also want to think about something like they all should also line up by cost, right? White is in an interesting position because a lot of the conditional white instants only cost 1 mana anyway. Like, I'm talking about Swords to Plowshares, I'm talking about Path to Exile. It's easy to keep up 1 mana.
Yeah.
Right? That's not as big of a cost.
Yeah.
But if you're holding up more, like, your mana sinks ought to cost less than what you're holding up to cast them.
That'd be ideal.
So in a blue deck, if you're only holding up 2 blue the whole time, but none of your draw spells cost 2 blue, like if all of your draw spells are like a Blue Sun Zenith, like blue X kind of thing, you have to be holding up a ton of mana to cast blue X. And what are those situations? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously that's when you start to talk about brewing a specific type of deck. That's where we get the draw go type, right? Like my Far deck is like that because it's all flash creatures, and this type of thinking is what got me to where, you know, if you're holding up mana for flash creatures, then I might as well put counter spells in there too, because then I can stop things and I'm holding up mana, and that way I'm giving myself flexibility. Some of the colors and some of the color pairings, they don't, like you're saying, they don't have that flexibility when it comes from the actual instance themselves. So you want to be looking at these mana sinks. So what type of mana sink though, right? Like there are lots of different types of mana sinks. Like you said, there's you know, cycling costs on cards in your hand, but there's like onboard mana sinks as well. Like there'll be like a sack outlet or something that costs mana. Like that is a mana sink, right?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about draw spells as instants, but there's lots of cards that are enchantments that allow you to draw in black specifically. Yeah. That's the same thing. That's like I can spend 2 mana and 2 life to draw a card from something like a greed type of effect. So like I'm happy to do that on the end step there. Something like green, I know that like we usually will run a scavenging ooze. I mean, I know you have to only use specifically green, but I'm happy to I will snipe a few cards out of a graveyard as an opportunity cost if I have that available to me, for sure.
Yeah, get that ooze a bit bigger, gain some life. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
making tokens, that's another classic one.
Making tokens, that's a great way to use mana that you haven't used at the end of the last turn. So, yeah, don't forget about these. I suspect a lot of us are not using them well enough.
There are definitely ones that are better than others, and I think that obviously, you know, strategy comes into play. Like if we're playing tokens, Sacred Mesa? Is that the name of that card?
The land, right? That makes Pegasuses?
It's an enchantment. Yeah, Sacred Mesa is the card. It's 2 and a white, an enchantment. Beginning of your upkeep, you sack it unless you sacrifice a Pegasus. But you can pay 1 and a white to put a 1/1 white Pegasus creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Like, it's an amazing.
That's a very interesting one.
Yeah, it's you to keep it alive, you just need to pay 1 and a white essentially per turn. But if you have more than that, then it really does start to add up. It's one of the best token creators.
Oh, I want to offer this. You made me think of a new one in white that's just brand new. It's what is it? Hope, the new enchantment from the most recent, not RNA, but from Guilds of Ravnica. It costs 1 and a white, and for 4 mana you can make a 1/1 life linker, but every time you gain life you can pay 2 and draw a card. So that's a card where like that becomes an extra mana sink in addition to things that gain us life and things like that.
And this all comes down to the idea that using all your mana every turn is the best way to get ahead. Usually the person at the end of the game who spent the most mana is the person that wins. That's just the way it works, because you've done the most things, whether it's cast the most spells or activated something the most times or whatever it is. That's usually, you know, in general. And in multiplayer, it even becomes more important just because there's so many, you know, more opportunities to do it. There's so many more spells to counter and stuff like that. There's so much more to think about. It's harder, more complicated, but even more important. So.
And just take a look, because like I have done blue decks before where like I was just like, I'll put one or 2 counter spells in and lots of draw spells. But if all your spells are draw spells, then again we run into the reverse problem. This is what you mentioned with Ifara, where it's like every single one of my instances meant to be at the turn before, but then then I've got that flexibility. I might as well take advantage of that, of putting in things I could do alternately that are more narrow in scope. But I wouldn't want to go the other way. I wouldn't want to put narrow ones first and then flexible ones later.
Right. What do you think is the best type of mana sink for the specific colors? Blue, it's easy to say. Blue, counter spells, instant speed draw. This is what is very, very good for blue. Very, very good for commander. What are some things that black has its ability? You mentioned greed.
Yeah,
black does do draw quite well. So it's actually pretty easy for black to have those types of mana sinks available, as well as like instant speed kill spells and things like that.
Greed, Arguel's Bloodfast is the same sort of functionally. What's his name? The god, the black, I can't remember his name. Erebos has that. I mean, these are all kind of the same effect, but yeah, like these are things I'm happy to do at my opponent's last end step before my turn. And I'll just spend a little bit of mana and a little bit of life before my turn begins.
Black also has some options of like reanimating. There's some instant speed reanimation that's available in black. That's also definitely something that you might want to think about if you're that type of deck. There's also, of course, in green.
Okay, green's a tricky one.
Green's tricky because there's some like token makers. There's a couple things that like on board make tokens. But generally
like
green's. Yeah, Ant Queen. There's an enchantment that makes centaurs. It's like Glade.
Oh yes,
Glade. Centaur Glade. Simple. It's 2 and 2. It's a 3 and 2 green, so 5 mana enchantment, and then for 2 and 2 green, you put a 3/3 green centaur creature token into play. I think it's a pretty underrated little enchantment if you're looking to make tokens.
Yeah, because it's on an enchantment, so it sticks around a lot longer than Ant Queen does. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
That's going to be green's main ability for it.
Right. I mean, otherwise we can keep things open like Crossing Grip and things like that, but that's very situational. That's not...
Again, our spot removal, we want to run mana sinks to make our spot removal better, so that we're not caught holding up Crossing Grip mana and not using it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's tougher in colors like green and red, especially in Commander, because those are colors that want to use things at sorcery speed to be casting creatures or enchantments and things like that, right? So it's actually a lot harder in green specifically, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I think red is almost one of the toughest ones. Like, I was brainstorming some red mana sinks. It's like a lot of ways red wants to spend mana are to pump creatures like with fire breathing type effects.
Right.
But that's no good at my opponent's end step. Like that's by the way we are defining a mana sink for this discussion, that's not a useful one.
Right.
Because
yeah.
I can't get benefit out of my mana at the end of the turn cycle if I haven't spent it.
The one good thing is that like that is still a mana sink, right? Technically speaking, because that can allow you to use up all your mana for something. So it can be an attack with fire breathing or whatever. It's just that in these colors there aren't that many reasons to hold up mana on your opponent's turns, right? In green and red in Commander, you're often not holding up instant speed something. There just isn't that much to do. So in that case, it's better to try to maybe use all your mana on your turn, get the most out of it, and then just, I don't know, kind of hope to weather the storm.
Yeah, in this case, these red mana sinks could function better as just more convenient shapes of containers to put your mana in. Like, if you can't spend 4, but I can spend 3 on this, then well, that makes sense. I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we already mentioned white. White has a decent amount of them because there's lots of token makers. There's some good instant speed stuff to do. So I think white's pretty okay with that.
Yeah, white's okay. So at the end of the day, I want to have things I can spend mana on at the end of my opponent's step before my turn begins that have definite benefit on the board. I want to be making tokens. I want to be drawing cards. I want to be putting counters on stuff I already have.
Yeah, definitely.
That's what I look for in a mana sink.
Using your mana, if you're holding it up, making sure you still are able to use it. I think that's a great tip in making your decks win more, which are because you're able to do more things. I think it's pretty simple.
Yep.
Great.
So let us know if you've got some of your favorite mana sinks in the comments. If you've got like a secret tech that you love to do that has come in real handy, we'd love to hear about it. We didn't talk about colorless ones. There's probably a lot of great ones in there too that any deck can take advantage of.
Oh yeah, there's tons of artifacts that'll let you do stuff over and over again. And of course those can slot into anything. So that's where you want to have. I mean, that's why green I think works a lot with well with a lot of those types of things. So
yeah.
Anyways, great. Yeah. Hit subscribe. Peace.
Big thanks to all our patrons who make these episodes possible.
Yeah, and if you want to check out more comedy videos, check out our Brews News playlist.
Make sure you follow us on Twitch TV to see when we play live.
If you want to chat with us, head over to Twitter. We're at Commanders Brew.
And please hit subscribe to ding the bell and find out when we got new stuff coming out.
See you next time.
Bye.